It is possible that the beginning of salvage mechanics is coming to 3.11. There's 3 items on the roadmap that I believe may be working together towards this end, as well as some information from CIG themselves. So let's take a look at that and see what we might be able to look forward to in the near future. So, I know what people are saying already. Let's not get excited about something that may not even be happening. And they would be right. I don't want to create any sort of false hype around the salvage mechanic that we've seen come on the roadmap, get put off, come back on the roadmap, and get put off again. In fact, we've had the Reclaimer out for quite some time as a flyable ship, but completely unusable in its dedicated role of salvage. But I do believe the beginnings of salvage are being set up by some initial mechanics they're putting into the game, and we'll take a look at those specific features in just a second. But how much salvage and what kind of salvage might we get first is really the question. To get a base understanding of how CIG is breaking down the salvage mechanics, let's just take a look at what they had to say about it.
We really break it down into 4 different types. So there's hull scraping, which would be actually removing the hull, or basically the paint off of the hull. Then there's components, basically salvaging, taking out the components that are placed actually within the objects, so coolers, power plants, computers, so on and so forth. Then there's the maw, which would be actually crunching up the ships and disposing of them that way. And then there's actually siphoning of different oxygen or fuel, data, that kind of stuff.
Those 4 types of salvage aren't necessarily the order we're going to see them released into the game. What I'm seeing on the roadmap are items that seem in support of component salvage over the hull scraping they talked about. The 2 items that stand out the most to me are the Greycat FPS multi-tool cutting attachment and the object push-pull mechanics. Much like with mining, there's going to be obviously some sort of gameplay and operation that the player has to do, even for what seems like a fairly simple function like taking a component. It will probably be a little more involved than just holding F over an object as an inner thought and clicking on it to yank it out of the ship. As a Tier 1 implementation, it's easy to see them leveraging the multi-tool and the cutting attachment to need to detach a component from where it's anchored to the ship, and then using the object push-pull mechanic to physically grab that item and move it around. Yes, I know we can now pick up small-sized boxes, a hamburger, an apple, carry these things with us and be able to set them down somewhere. But for the purposes of having a little more involved gameplay, I can see them needing an object movement feature that is potentially a little more advanced, can accommodate items of various shapes and sizes, and maybe even expandable into deeper kinds of interaction with objects. If we look a little inside these 2 features, we see that the multi-tool includes the ability to freeform cut, but they also included on specific surfaces. These specific surfaces might be a very broad statement, like distinguishing being able to cut the hole somewhere on any ship versus being able to cut through the door at some mining facility. It could be more specific, like cutting a component hatch on a wrecked ship and then cutting the connection points for the component. If I were to take a wild guess, I would say the freeform cutting across a random surface on a ship's hull is probably something more in the area of the hull scraping that may need something like a Vulture. Then component salvage, which feels like something a little more hands-on by the player. Looking inside the object push-pull, we can also see that the intention is to grab larger objects and move them around either by pushing or pulling. And I would think that a size 2 component falls into the category of something larger than a delivery box, and therefore requires this kind of extended mechanic to be able to remove and pull an object out of a ship and then push it on board your own ship to carry it away. It's also probable that even the improved throw mechanic is intended to go beyond just the grenade as seen in the picture. They say that this is expanding the throw to accommodate other objects in the world. So Maybe this somehow plays into the picture of shoving smaller objects on board your ship. It's really hard to say, but it does seem like 55 tasks is a lot of tasks for something like throwing a grenade. Maybe it's more complicated than I think, but again, it's hard to say. It's great to have some of these outlying mechanics, but how far are we really along towards actually getting salvage, and what needs to happen?
For component retrieval, it's actually getting the items in, getting them placed within ships, getting power running, getting pipes working the way that we need it to work, so that so you can take it out of ships, but at the same time, when you're actually in the ship, you have the multi-crew gameplay of actually removing those items or switching them out on the fly if you're flying around, or even if you're in battle.
Okay, so let's break that down a little. We need the physicalized components, and we need to be able to place them into ships. And we need some power and pipe system, so removal and placement has some meaning. Let's see where we are with physicalized components.
And I understand a couple of things are actually being worked on right now. Obviously we've talked about the conversion to the physicalized components and everything before, and we're going to talk to John Crew after you about where that's at and how that's going.
Oh, well then, let's talk to John, who seems to know what's going on.
The props team have been working on all the components, so you will have seen them in all the shops. So there's literally hundreds of vehicle items being made or have already been made, and they're just doing the work to make them all fully release ready, because obviously it's one thing seeing them in the shop, it's another thing seeing them all embedded in the vehicles. On the actual vehicle content side, any vehicle that has been released in the last 18 months, 2 years, players will have noticed that they have all these hatches and component cupboards, for lack of a better word, popping up in their ships. So we build them in at production point now, or concept phase, so we know where they all go.
There was also the power and pipe system they said was needed. To get an idea of what that's about, let's hear from Dan Truffin. But when he uses the word component, I don't think he's talking about a ship component, but more of a software component, a kind of code module in the game that's going to be controlling these things.
And now we're talking to you about a power, but I have a feeling from talking to you before that what we're going to talk about is more than just power. What are you working on right now?
Yeah, it's definitely more than just power. So when we started building our ships and building our environments, we started building with what we call the pipe system. And this system, while it did its job pretty well, it's already a bit old and we're only using it right now for limited things. What we're trying to build is a system that encompasses all the resource generation and how you control items. And so when we're talking resource generation, I'm talking power, I'm talking CPU, I'm talking fuel, I'm talking coolant, I'm talking any type of other resource that we'll have in the future, ammo and all this stuff. So we're trying to build stuff in one component that rules them all. There's like any item will have that component and knows how to use any resource it needs and how to generate other resources that other items might need, or transfer them from one resource to another and generate heat and all this stuff. So it's all going to be built into one place rather than having multiple different systems that handle it differently.
So you can see that this power system, currently being called resource generation and item control, does seem to influence things like power from power plants, coolant from coolers, heat and ammo from weapons, all these different kinds of components that we should be able to salvage from ships. Now, on one hand, this new control system seems a little outside of strict salvage and being able to just take something off a ship and go sell it. But hearing them talk about this integrated control gets me a little excited, because it means there's an intention for things we salvage to not only be usable, but opens up the possibilities to be a Scotty and have a whole engineering role aboard a ship with these components, which I'll talk about in a whole separate video. Alright, so we need physical components and the item control system. Is any of this being worked now or the immediate future? John says it's happening next quarter, which would be the 3.11 release.
So scheduled for next quarter, the vehicle tech team are going to be working on a way to place those items physically inside the object containers of the ships, and then they will all automatically link up to all the external systems we need, and that will allow us and allow you to change your items inside the ship see them visually change and actually all be hooked up, which is, of course, a precursor to salvaging.
That sounds encouraging. What about this whole power or item control system and work being done there? And what's the order of events?
Maybe lay out the salvage roadmap for us. What's how do we see this going forward?
So right now, we're working on power, and we're basically getting that working the way that it's supposed to be working, so it's scalable. And then from there, we're working on getting all the items placed in the ships, and obviously with our catalog of ships, that takes a while. So those things are being worked on in tandem right now.
So he said in tandem, which means they might be worked together alongside each other, perhaps implementing the staggered development they have in place. But it sounded like the power or item control system is a dependency in the whole thing, and where their focus is toward getting us to salvage.
That team is fully focused right now on basically getting power working.
Even though we could get the hull scraping and the beloved Vulture first, with the cutting tool and roadmap items and this discussion from CIG, it really looks like component salvage is coming first. Particularly with these last words from Todd Pappy and how he described it.
So then it'll just be, okay, do we want to release the components, aspect first, or do we want to, release hull scraping, with the components, and say that is salvage as a whole. But no matter what, I think it'll just be us figuring out, okay, hey, here, this is our base salvage, and then we'll continue to iterate on it.
Things can change, particularly in the agile approach to development that CIG is using. But it really feels as if there is a potential for salvage pretty soon. The beginning salvage may not come in 3.11, but it feels like the component part is getting close. And if they do give us the ability to push and pull larger objects around in 3.11, makes you wonder what those things will be if it's not components. The members of the READ organization are being extremely generous again and have donated an Aurora MR with game package for a giveaway. READ is involved with science, exploration, and engineering, which includes the mining mechanics that we currently have, as well as future salvage. They're also involved in trade and logistics, and have a defense division to keep your mining and cargo hauling safe. READ is a non-griefing or trolling organization that focuses on collaboration and emphasizes mutual respect for its org members and the community at large. To be eligible to win, just type in a comment to the video. Like and subscribe if you want to, feel free to use my referral code if you're wanting to get into Star Citizen, and I'll be talking to you later.